Good afternoon and welcome to today's meRIT webinar, part of a series created exclusively for RIT alumni. I'm Lydia Palmer, Senior Director of Marketing and Communications in the Division of Development and Alumni Relations, and I'm your moderator for today's webinar. Before we begin, let's take a moment to ensure that everyone is ready and familiar with the presentation tools. All participants in today's webinar have joined in mute mode and cannot be heard during the presentation. However, we absolutely encourage participation. To submit your questions at any time, please enter them in the chat box. The chat box can be opened by clicking on the chat icon at the right of your Livestorm window. We will make every effort to address all your comments and questions throughout the webinar. You are joining today's webinar using broadcast audio. If for any reason you wish to dial in by phone, dial-in information is provided in the chat box. Live captioning is also being provided during this webinar, and you can find the link to access that in the chat box as well. Note that today's webinar will be recorded and made available, complete with captions, in approximately 1 week following today's event. All participants will receive an email with the link to the recording. If you have any technical questions, please feel free to type those into the chat box as well, and we will do our best to get you the appropriate answers. And with that, let's get started. Today's webinar is Finding Out What Your Customer Thinks, Surveys or Focus Groups. Our returning guest presenter is Margi Ochs, Director of Marketing and Business Development in the John D. Hromi Center for Quality and Applied Statistics here at RIT. Margi is a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt and holds a BA degree from Georgetown University and an MBA from the University of Rochester. She teaches Lean Six Sigma courses and assists students to apply and implement their studies through consultation, assessments, and workshops to deepen their own knowledge and experience. Margi trained as a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt at Xerox, where she led over 60 projects in the areas of marketing, product development, strategic planning, customer service, and manufacturing, totaling over $350 million in revenue generation and cost savings. She has carried her Lean Six Sigma experience into a variety of positions, including Worldwide Vice President, Office Products Launch, Consumables Marketing and Strategy, and Competitive Consumables Market Development. She served as a Lean Six Sigma loaned executive, consulting with over 80 Xerox customers on Lean Six Sigma implementation in their organizations. Margi, we're happy to have you with us again today, and our audience is yours.
Thank you so much, Lydia. It's always a pleasure to speak to the alumni. And one of the things that I find most gratifying are the questions that we get throughout the webinar and even after. So this is really in response to our earlier webinar where we talked about some statistical methods related to surveys. So today we'll do a deeper dive into some of the questions that we've gotten surrounding finding out what customers think and deciding what are the right tools, and nobody hang up, but what are the right statistics to look at when we're doing consumer thinking. So with that, I think you have a very good background from Lydia as to who I am and what I have done. And if you have any questions, as I say, throughout the webinar, you just continue to send them in and we'll deal with them. But let's dive right into the information at hand. So from our last webinar, many people wrote in with questions about what they wanted to know and when was it appropriate to do a survey or a focus group or an interview. Some people literally had questions about, we want to find out if our hours are convenient, or if people could follow the instructions that came in the box, or we just changed our process and we want to know if that process works for our clients. So we're going to tackle those types of situations today and see how we might approach that to get the answers that your business or organization needs. So we're going to talk a little bit about survey question design, just a little, because we've had some questions on that. We're going to get into sample size determination, and don't panic because I've got a quick and easy method for you to figure out how many people you should be surveying and how confident you should be. We had some questions about measurement scales, and we're going to talk about those and how to set them up. We're definitely going to talk about focus groups versus surveys and even interviews. And yes, we'll talk a little bit about when should a survey really be a marketing tactic, because we had some questions on that. So with that, we had some questions from our last webinar. I am not going to read them to you. I know that with your RIT degree, you've mastered reading quite successfully. So I just wanted to include the questions that I've received and just tell you that we will be talking, as I just mentioned, about sample sizes, about what to do when your vice president wants a very, very long survey, about things on your survey that you can't fix, but then what should you say, about how to hold a good focus group, and about things like, I don't think my population or my universe is large enough to get a good sample, and how can we do that? And we'll talk about all those ways of getting the right sample, getting the right tool, using the most effective questions, and using real estate well. And I'm going to put the slide up at the end, so if there's anything you don't feel we've covered, it'll be a reminder to you. But we're always willing to take new questions. So as we talked about at the last webinar, let's begin with the end in mind. We want to keep the survey simple. We want to keep the focus group questions direct. We don't want to ask binary questions, because if it's just yes or no, there will be respondents who will say yes or no and not give you any more information. And so we're going to talk about how we can elicit the responses that are going to make a difference and get you the results that you need. So we talked about the Big 10, and if you've got any questions about those, make sure that you put them to Lydia and the team, and we'll make sure we answer those throughout the webinar. So let's dive right in and talk about a population and a sample and what you're really doing with a survey. A survey goes out and it tries to estimate, what does the population think if we only take a smaller sample? We may not have the money or the time to sample the entire population, and we really don't need to if we use good statistics. So one question that someone literally called me on, and I was glad to take the phone call, was, how do you decide what your sample should be from the population? The most straightforward answer I can give you is that you take every 10th person or every 3rd person on your email list, or you use a random number generator, and you go into your list of emails, and there are programs that will do this for you, and you select a certain number of people using that random number generator tool. So when we take a sample, we want to make sure that we're not just picking out all of the blonde, green-eyed, two-headed people, but that we're doing this randomly so they represent the entire population. And then we're trying to establish a confidence that this sample reflects the entire population. So you will hear people say, I'm 95% confident that the sample reflects the population plus or minus 1%, meaning I could be between 94 and 96% confident that the population, the sample reflects the population. You're saying, oh, now you're losing me. What about this 95% and plus or minus and this confidence interval language? And we're going to get to that. But just before we do, remember that I say that you want to keep in mind, what are your objectives with any survey or focus group or interview that you're going to do? So you want to be very clear about what you're trying to discover. In this example, we're saying we want to get the level of perceived customer satisfaction with a new cheeseburger on a donut offering that's been offered to the population in the last 2 weeks, the people that come into our restaurant. And we really want to focus on women between the age of 25 and 35. Now, I built this off of a question that I received in email that says, how specific should I get with the objectives of my survey? And the answer is, be as specific as you possibly can be. If you detect that women between the ages of 25 and 35 aren't ordering the cheeseburger on a donut offering, maybe you want to just go survey your population of women customers between the age of 25 and 35, and you want to sample the 10th, every 10 women that come into your establishment. You don't want to know what they think of the cleanliness. You don't want to know what they think if they were 12 years old. And maybe you don't even need to know what time they came in. So this is sometimes, and I'm probably guilty of this, having been in this role, this is sometimes what you run into when your executive says, oh, but we do want to know all those things. We want to ask all of those questions. And I will tell you that the more specific you can be with your objectives, the easier time you will have talking to your executive. So if the executive says, oh, and by the way, throw in some questions on cleanliness, remember that's going to take those women between the ages of 25 and 35 a little bit extra time to fill those questions out. And remember that you need to be as efficient as you can be with time, because we'll see that to get more customers taking advantage of your survey or your focus group, you need to be very careful with their time. So make sure that you have measurable objectives for your survey. Don't assume that you can ask every question that someone might possibly raise. And if it's a survey, try to keep it to 3 minutes or less. If it's a focus group, we'll talk a little bit about how long focus groups can be. So a good test can be, does the organization really want the information, or does somebody just have a question that's nagging at them? Will the question that you're asking generate some sort of action or activity? And make sure that you're not looking to justify a situation. And we'll talk about that in just a minute with a survey that someone actually sent in to me. And make sure that you're separating the difference between we're doing a survey because we want feedback and we're doing a survey because this is just a masked way of marketing to more customers. So let's dive right in and talk about the difference between a survey and a focus group. Now, if you want a very cost-effective solution for a very large population, then probably a survey is the best way to go. It can be easier to analyze the results. We can make the results predictive, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Results can be anonymous if you're asking something that's a little bit tricky and maybe masked if people have to give their names. You may not be able to probe for causality, meaning tell me more about why you answered the question this way. That's difficult to do when you've only got a 3-minute survey. But still, a survey can be a great way to get feedback from a large number of people if you keep the survey to the time frame that they're interested in investing. But maybe you should be considering a focus group. Perhaps you did a survey and you got some results you weren't expecting. Perhaps, as we did at Xerox, you have a new product and you want to understand what people really think of the product. You want to get a group of people together, and generally it will be somewhere around 10 to 15 people. If you do more than that, we'll talk about the impact of a very large focus group. But you'll be getting together a group of people. The results will be more personal. They'll be more interactive. You won't be able to use statistical techniques because you don't have a large enough sample, but you can do something called content analysis. Now, you'll have to be careful that you're not subject to leader bias, and I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. Sometimes focus groups can get off course where surveys can't, because I know the questions I have to answer, and that's about all I can do. And I'll tell you this story about leader bias and bully effect. So we had a product that we wanted to put into the market when I was at Xerox, and we did focus groups in 5 cities internationally. We did these focus groups with 10 people. We actually paid the people to devote 2 hours to come to a location. We told them that they would be videotaped, and we sourced them based on certain attributes. They were existing Xerox customers. They had used our office products, and we wanted to get a little bit of compare and contrast that we couldn't get out of a survey. So we brought the people to various locations in their local city. As I say, we provided them with a stipend for their time. We even paid them, or I shouldn't say paid them, we provided lunch. And we had a leader who was going to conduct the focus group. So the focus group got off and got started, and the leader started asking questions that we had decided. And about 10 minutes into the focus group, we're behind a one-way mirror, and we're listening to what the respondents in the focus group are saying, the participants. And the leader asks a question about a particular way that a copier printer, you could submit jobs to it and get those jobs out in a particular order. And one of the respondents in the focus group said, "Oh, that is the hardest thing to do. I just can't get it to work. Xerox has told me." Now, they didn't know we were Xerox. I should have said that. Xerox has told me how to do that over and over and over again, but those people just don't speak my language. With that, the head of engineering, and for those of you who are engineers, I apologize in advance, the head of engineering stood up, ran running into the room and said, "What do you mean you don't understand how to do that? Let me explain it to you." So that was a little bit of a lesson in the bully effect and in somewhat subject leader bias, because now that focus group was tainted. That focus group wasn't going to be comfortable giving any answers. And you'll say, "Well, you were Xerox. Didn't you know enough not to do that?" Well, we did. But the head of engineering was so passionate about this, he couldn't hold him back from the room. So weird things happen. And you want to make sure that if you're going to have a focus group, maybe you invite those people to listen or watch the videos that are taken and not necessarily invite them to the event. But a little bit more on that later. Now, I got a question about when should you invest in an interview. And here's a consideration for when you move from a survey to a focus group to an interview. Sometimes you want to do what we call a phone survey, where you call people, and if you can get them to talk to you, it is much more like an interview. Sometimes you look at your satisfaction results, maybe on a survey or in some other means, and the person gave their name, and you literally want to go talk to them. And here would be my insight on that. Remember that interviews can be costly. It takes time, it takes money, it takes an investment on both of your parts. It can be somewhat intimidating. It's not anonymous. And remember that the person you're interviewing might psychologically want to please you. And so they will be less honest than if they were anonymous or if they were not talking to you one-to-one. These can be very probative. They can be highly informational. But remember that an interview can be subject to respondent bias if the interview gets led in a certain direction, or if I decide I don't want to hurt your feelings, I really like you. So just wanted to bring up the subject of an interview, which is one-on-one, versus a focus group, which is one on a few, versus a survey, which is an entire sample of the population.
Margi, you have a question coming in. Do you have an opinion on whether people in the organization should actually lead the focus group, or should you hire an experienced third-party leader?
Lydia, that's a great question. And we used to have a joke around Xerox that if we wanted to hire the best focus group leader, it should be from one of our competitors. So generally, if you can afford it, it is very good to hire someone who is professional, because they are trained in how to do these types of focus group experiences, how to get the best responses. They will sit with you and understand what is the purpose of the focus group, and they'll really know how to probe for answers. If you cannot spend the money to hire a focus group professional, then what you want to do is to pick someone out of the organization that you know doesn't have a bias. Maybe they are not from engineering or from marketing, and we just tend to be very biased people. Maybe you want someone from HR. Maybe you want someone from customer service. But there are agencies out there who do professional focus group planning with you. If you can't afford them, maybe you could just buy a little of their time to prep the person that's going to run the focus group from your organization. Maybe if you can't even afford to do that, I can give you some websites that help you to prepare for running a focus group. But I would say the best thing is, don't have the people who are directly involved in the outcome be the leader or leaders of the focus group. Great question. So let's go back to surveys for a moment, because I did get a question on this, and that is survey etiquette. Probably the most important thing that you can do with a survey in the times that we live in is you can tell the respondent how much time they should budget for the survey. So even if you're running a focus group, this is going to take X number of minutes for this survey, or an hour for this focus group. You want to tell them up front, because that allows them to say, I'm willing to budget 3 minutes for this survey, or I'm willing to go down to this office building in town and go participate in a focus group for an hour. So you are being respectful of their time and telling what your intention is. Another question I got is, what if the survey is anonymous, but you want to give some feedback on the results? What I would suggest is that you leave a website and a date. And on the survey, you say, if you would like to receive the results of the entire survey, or if you would like to receive the highlights of the survey, please go to www.resultsofthissurvey.com on October 15th. And then your participants know that there's a place they can go, and they can be certain that you're serious about providing them the results. Another question that I received was, well, but we don't have room in the survey for write-in comments. And my answer is, then you've got too many questions on your survey, because you always want to leave room for write-in comments, because they are sometimes the most colorful and informative. They tell you what the respondent was thinking, and they're so important in order to really understand how effective your survey was. And don't forget, as one person mentioned to me the last time, if you want the survey to be done online, if it's not going to be done by direct mail, and nowadays most surveys are done online, make sure you optimize for mobile usage, because there are a lot of people out there who answer surveys right from their phone. And I see we did have an experience about a situation where a person in our audience had a boss who was responding to very leading questions and misdirected the group from the goal. And even as a new employee, this person felt that it was really a waste of time. I am so glad that you wrote in your comment, because now you've got an agency of your own, and you know the hard way what it takes to really run effective focus groups. So again, use these agencies, ask if you can purchase their time to run the focus group, or they can give you some insights into this, but they are very, very valuable in this process. Now, a number of you wrote in and you had very, very clear ideas of whether you should give a gift or not. Remember that I talked the last time about the concept of cognitive dissonance. If I ask you to run 10 miles and I say, and I'll pay you a quarter to do it, odds are you're going to run those 10 miles because you're really committed to doing it. The quarter didn't make a difference at all. That's cognitive dissonance. The smaller the reward, the more people feel that they're invested. And someone did point out to me, if you give coupons for your product, if you give a perhaps a hashtag or some sort of reward, that is viewed as a marketing tactic and is not always viewed as a gift for doing a survey, and it can impact your results. If you are doing an anonymous survey and you are getting the results by hand, you want to be sure that people don't feel like you are looking over their shoulder to look at their handwriting or to look at the way that they answered the survey in terms of the pattern that they followed. They went through these questions first. What you want to do is to make sure that it's entirely anonymous. If the results are by phone, the person can still be anonymous, but the desire to please can apply. Even if I call you on the phone and I'm calling from a large phone bank and I don't know who you are, sometimes that desire to please the person who's asking the questions can apply. And if they're online, remember that there can be sometimes a bias toward the negative or dissatisfied. I'm sending the survey out to 10,000 people, and in sending the survey out, I'd like you to fill this out. Odds are, like the United Airlines effect, the people who are going to take the time are the people who have something to tell you, and they're generally a little bit more negative or dissatisfied. But maybe you want to get those results and deal with them. Now, we've just had a question about advice for pitching the use of a focus group in the first place and justifying the cost to a client to feel they already know everything. And yes, I have run into many scenarios where an executive or a director felt it wasn't necessary, even though the people in the rest of the organization felt like we didn't have the good answers. This can be a very, very difficult prospect to overcome. Probably the most effective way I found of doing this is to do one of two things. Either send out a survey to a broad number of people and get results that tell you that people have something to say, or do a small sample survey and convince the executive from the survey results that they really do want to do a focus group. So prove to them that there are results out there they really do need to understand. Do it inexpensively, do it over the web, do it with direct mail if you have the money, but do a little survey, find out that the results aren't what the executive expects, and then persuade them to use the focus group to really be able to dive into the results and justify the cost of that event. And understand, as people are saying, that if there's not a reward, it might be because the person who is conducting the survey doesn't want to bias your results. So if the question is there a reward for filling out the survey, and the answer you get is no, and you refuse participation, that's absolutely your right. However, sometimes rewards aren't given simply because the answers that are being collected should not be biased in any way. So that's the whole impact of cognitive dissonance. And you can see some people think of rewards as an incentive to bias their answers. Other people think, no, the reward is actually paying me for my time. So that might be something you want to use in a pretest. Do a quick phone survey, say you're not giving a gift, and see how many people say that I'm not interested. And then you can get in your pretest an idea of how sensitive your audience actually is. So these are good questions, and I hope we're having a useful dialogue. Now, let's talk a little bit about response rates in the types of surveys. If you go to Pew Research, they will tell you that you will get the largest response rate if you talk to people in person. And they're talking about doing mall surveys. They're talking about reaching out to people live on the sidewalk, whatever the case may be. The risk is that the people who answer your survey in person have to be willing to participate. And you will get a high number of refusals. People who say, I don't have the time. No, I'm not interested. I don't respond to this type of survey. Or if you're like me, and it's a rare instance that you're in a shopping mall, hey, I've got something to do and I got to be somewhere. So no, I'm not going to answer your survey. So you'll get more people because you'll spend hours gathering them. It is thought the next highest response rate is mail surveys, direct mail surveys, but you've got to have the money to do them. And you've got to make sure that the person who receives the piece of direct mail opens the request. But oftentimes when you are doing a direct mail survey, you will buy customers in a specific zip code, or customers who just bought a product, or customers who just used your service. And so you probably will have a certain population, but you already have preconditioned, I should say, to know that these are respondents that you're actually looking to capture. Email is a great way if they actually open the email. Online, meaning online in an application, or online on a website, for example. That can be a way to gather a larger sample to put your survey online, but they might look at the survey and then they might decide that they don't have the time, they have to leave the survey. Telephone, the risk you run is you can call enough people until you get the sample size you want, but you're going to have people who are not answering their phone because they don't see who you are. Applications are probably the way to get the largest number of respondents, but sometimes fear it's advertising and then they just click off your survey. So think about what you want, how much money you have, how much time you have, what degree of predictability you have. Think about what's easiest for your respondents, and think about things like, how do you want to analyze the data that you receive? Those are all questions we're going to talk about in just a minute. So I'm going to warn you ahead of time. This is for mature audiences only. We are going to dive into some statistics. And knowing that this is an elite RIT audience, I know you're going to be able to handle this. So probably the biggest question, the most number of people wrote in and said, I need help. How do I know how many people I need to survey to be sure of my results? And my answer was, well, how confident do you want to be with your results? So using the correct sample size is crucial, because if you survey too many people, you're wasting your precious resources. If you don't sample enough, you won't have statistical predictability. So here's an example. If you want to be 90% confident that the results you're getting from a survey is representative of the population, with, let's say, a margin of error of plus or minus 3%, that would take a sample size of about 750 people responding to your survey. And I'll talk about how we derive these numbers in a minute. But if you want to move from 90 to 95% confidence, then you'd have to move from 750 people to 1,000 respondents to your survey. So the more sure you want to be, the more people you need to survey from your population, the bigger the sample size you need to take. So just keep going with me and ask yourself, is the question you're asking on the survey, is the survey itself, do you need to be 99% positive with a margin of error of plus or minus 1%? Do you need to be 95% certain? Is 90% good enough? That's the question you need to ask yourself. And you can go to a website, we're going to talk about this in a minute, that will tell you how large your sample size need to be if you want to be certain at a certain level and with a margin of error. Why do we have to have a margin of error? Because we're all human beings and error and variation creeps into everything. And so if you want to be 100% sure, then ask your population, your entire population. And so let's say that you have 500 buyers in a population. You can go to a table I'm going to show you, and it will tell you that you need a sample size of 485 respondents to be 99% sure with a margin of error of plus or minus 1%. But if you have 1,000 buyers, then you wanted to be 99% certain, you'd have to sample 943. And I'll show you how to look that up on the table, because you want to be 99% with a plus or minus 1% confidence interval. So you can see that the larger your population, the larger your sample size needs to be, because you want to be more confident. So people ask me, well, what's an acceptable margin of error? Now, survey researchers will tell you, well, go for 95% and pick a confidence interval that's between maybe 4 and 8%. This is up to you, and I can't give you the right answer unless we're talking, and really there is no right answer, but you decide how much of a margin of error you want from the sample to your population. And you're probably saying, what is she talking about? So let's move on. But I just want to address a comment about online surveys that get longer and longer and longer, and they have nested questions. If you answered yes to this, then we're going to direct you to this set of questions. If you answered no, drop down to this survey, and you feel like you need a roadmap in order to complete the survey. Remember what we talked about. Longer surveys are going to have a higher dropout rate, and therefore you can't count those responses in the sample you got, and you'll need to survey more and more people to be 90 or 95 or even 99% certain to get the sample size you need that represents your population. So you do not need a PhD in statistics, but I am here to tell you that at the Kate Gleason College of Engineering, we are more than happy to talk to you about getting advanced degrees in statistics, but that's my commercial. So here's a calculator that I've given you. And you'll say, but Margi, I have a population of 10,000 people, and I'd love to survey all 10,000 of them, but I don't know if all 10,000 of them will respond to me. I might give them a gift, but believe me, I can't pay 10,000 people to respond to me. I can't survey the entire population. No, you can't. That would be improbable. So then you ask me, well, how big should my sample size be? And I'm going to say to you, how confident do you need to be? Let's go to one of the online calculators. I've given you an example. And let's say you tell me that you've got 10,000 customers and you want to be 95% confident that the results mirror the entire population. So you're getting a very reliable survey. And your 10,000 customers, you want to have, let's say, a margin of error between 94 and 96%, or plus or minus 1%, around 95%. I'm going to say, hey, good news. You need to sample a little less than half of your population, or about 5,000 people. If you go to the table, you look up 10,000 as your population size, you look up 95% at a 1% margin of error, the number is 4899. So you only need to sample less than half of your population. But you say, I don't have 10,000 people in my population. I only have 500 people, and I want to be 99% confident that the results mirror the population. This is crucial to us. It is so important. And I want to be plus or minus 1%. Then if we go to the table, if your population size is 100 and you want your confidence interval to be 99% plus or minus 1%, you're going to have to sample the entire population of 99 people. But if you only want to be, let's say, 95%, and you're willing to be between 90 and 100%, you'd only need to sample 80 people, get 80 responses. So you can see that if you use a calculator, it's going to do all that math for you, and it's going to tell you, based on your population size, how many people you need to get responses from. So how large a sample do you need? Now, we've had a question. Is it okay to take a subset of focus group respondents and execute a follow-up focus group to that specific pool to get more specific responses? Or will that skew your response because this targeted pool knows you're after something specific? And I have a very simple answer. It's fine to do that. Focus groups are not statistical. So if your focus group leader can continue to be very unbiased and can lead your subset focus group, all you're doing is probing for a different answer. With focus groups, we tend to use a tool called content analysis. But with a focus group, we cannot ask for statistical significance. So oftentimes at Xerox, we might send out a survey, see what the sample was telling us, and then we would go to specific locations and do focus groups, which were not statistical, but they really allowed us to bore in much deeper to get answers to questions that puzzled us from the survey. So remember that you can take a subset of focus group attendees, and if they're willing, ask them to show up for a follow-on or ask them to stay a little bit longer. And you'll just be getting deeper and deeper answers as long as you're not detecting, like the case of my wonderful engineer, a bias where someone literally leaps into the room and says, this is what you should be doing. So as long as you're keeping your biases at a minimum and you're conducting a good and thorough focus group with a qualified leader, you should be able to go get people who are in the focus group and ask them to give you more specific answers in a subset situation. But remember, focus groups are not statistical, and they rely on, if you want to use it, a tool called content analysis. So that is a very good question. So let me tell you a little bit of a story to make sure that you understand confidence intervals and confidence levels and what the heck I'm talking about. So a confidence interval is a margin of error. I won't get into statistical formulas, but a confidence interval says I am between this and this confident, plus or minus 1%, that the results of the sample mirror the entire population. My confidence level is a little bit different. It says that's the percentage of the population that lie within the boundaries of the margin of error. And you say, what? And I say to you, think of something that looks like a normal distribution with a really high curve at 95%. If you want to be plus or minus 1%, you're going to actually have to survey based on that size of sample that we just talked about to be able to say the results of my survey show that 95% of the population with a margin of error around of plus or minus 1% will reflect the views of the population. So we have a comment about a population of 500 at 95% with a 1% confidence interval. If we're hoping to be able to survey the 475 number that came out of that table, it might be unlikely. So what do we do with a relatively low population? And indeed, the answer is either we need to figure out how to get you a very high response rate, or we need to figure out how to get you a confidence interval that you're comfortable with, but that doesn't involve having to survey the entire population. So if you want absolute statistical significance, you need to use the methods that I just discussed. If that is not as important to you, you just want to get a trend, you just want to get an idea of what's happening, then you don't need to go for statistical significance. And if fewer people respond, you'll take that as a trend. But let me tell you a little story that happened back when the 2012 election was being held. So a very well-known survey group went out and did a survey at Gallup, I'll tell you the name, and they said that Romney was going to win the 2012 election. Romney would get 49% of the vote, Obama 48%. They shared their confidence was 95% with a margin of error of between 93 and 97%. So they felt that they could predict with 95% confidence and a margin of error of plus or minus 2% that George Romney should be planning his inauguration. And what happened? The actual results were almost the reverse. Romney got 51% of the electoral delegates, which meant, Obama. Thank you, Lydia. I nearly recalled an entire election. Obama got 51% of the electoral votes. And so he was the one who should be planning his reelection. So it shows that there's no such thing as a sure bet. So remember, if we're doing a survey, we are talking about a margin of error. We are talking about human beings. We are talking about getting responses from a sample that we either designed by taking every X person, or a sample that came to us because we only got 420 responses out of our population of 500 people, and it wasn't enough to give us the significance that we wanted. So if you simply are comfortable with a trend, which we are many times in a survey, that's fine. If we're not satisfied with a trend and we want to get to a high confidence with statistical significance, then we need to talk about how to design a survey so you will get the respondents that you actually need, that will be part of your sample, but mirroring the population. Okay, so remember, when you're looking at the information that you're collecting, you need to know if it's opinion, in which case a trend might be fine. If it's a fact, in which case you might want to get into statistical significance. Or is it an intent to buy, in which case trend might be very beneficial to you. And remember that you have many other ways of gauging this. If you want to know if people are interested in your product, maybe you want to see if they're actually buying it. Maybe you want to see if when they come into the store, they're spending a certain amount of time looking at your product. And then make sure that you're prepared to act on the survey results that you're getting. Otherwise, you're probably wasting the respondents' time and you're wasting your own time. Question I got real quick was, tell me again about the types of questions I should be asking. And we always say, if you're going to use a Likert scale and not use a binary yes, no, then you want to include the scale with every question. So don't follow the format that's in the upper right-hand side. Follow the format that is on the left-hand side of the survey. And try to stay away from binary questions because it's not an answer that can be easily analyzed. Now, someone sent into me a question that they got. I believe it popped up when they were using an app, and it was, should the person who was most recently voted into the presidency be impeached by the House of Representatives? Yes, under certain conditions. Or if there is confidence the Senate will vote the same. And the person wrote in and said, what if the answer is no, I don't think they should impeach the president? Hard to answer that question. So make sure when you're asking questions that you're truly including all the answers that could be out there. And you'll notice this isn't a Likert scale. This is just simply, it's not agree all the way over to disagree. It's just, what do you think should happen? So make sure that if you're going to ask the question, you're giving all the answers so you get a reliable answer to what you're asking. Remember that you don't want to ask questions that are open-ended, because then basically the respondents have to answer every question in a paragraph and it might take too much time. And if you're including questions for users about the helpfulness or usefulness or level of success on the survey itself, that is something that is predominantly used in product or survey reviews. Did you find the questions in the survey to be helpful? Were you able to give a good assessment of your view of the product? Now, that just tells you maybe something that you should include in a pretest, which is, are your questions written in the language of the target respondent? And are you truly getting answers that are going to be beneficial to you from the survey? So remember, we want to begin with the end in mind. Don't ask more questions and use up real estate that you have time for. And don't ask a lot of open-ended questions that are going to take the respondent's time. Take it out for a spin. Do some test survey work. And you'll find if you're going to have some aborts on your survey, which would tell you maybe I want to change the survey up a bit because people are already leaving the survey. They're not filling it out. They're not staying with it. And when I took it out for a spin, I got a lot of aborts. Now, when you collect and analyze the data, and this could be a whole topic of conversation. Do you want to get statistical accuracy or do you just want to get a pulse? Do you want to use a package that will help you tabulate the results? Did you promise to return any findings to your survey participants? And another question to ask is there anything shocking that surprises you and you want to get more insight? Maybe you want to do a little telephone survey. Maybe you want to do some interviews. Maybe you want to do a focus group. So if the responses are something surprising, think about how you might probe for more information. Another question we got was about surveying and sharing the results. You do not have to share the results of the survey question by question, but you might just want to show what were some bullet points that you learned. Share that website to show that you are sharing results of the survey on this date. Remember, some users will be worried about cookies and you tracking them, but if people are really interested, they probably are not going to be as strongly anonymous as those that want to stay anonymous because they don't want to have you track them down. And remember to thank the respondents. Very important. And if you want people to stay anonymous, but if you want to tell them that they can give you a response that they couldn't share in the survey, just include an email at the bottom of the survey and say, if you would like to share more information or more insights with us, please feel free to email us at this particular email. Just make sure it's a monitored email. In the end, what are some risks to watch for? Going to the population too many times. One person emailed me and said that their executive goes to the population 6 times a year, and they were starting to see respondent drop off. And I said, I'm not surprised. If you ask a population too many times, if your survey is very long, if your respondents don't see changes over time to the answers, I should say to the results of what they gave, then they're going to feel like, this survey isn't a good use of my time. Again, anonymous, we had a lot of questions on that. Remember that people who are anonymous, you can give them the option to provide their contact information, and that's their option. They don't have to take it. And people with issues are more likely to remain anonymous because of that respondent bias that they don't want to displease. But if you do have people who have an issue, a problem, something they want to raise, make sure that you do follow up. So if we don't have any other burning questions, just remember that we do offer a whole class in this topic where we can dive in very deeply because it lasts for 2 days. We are looking at offering it online for those of you who are not in the Rochester area. And we're also offering a whole set of belt classes, yellow belt, green belt, black belt. And we're even offering a class on systems engineering. So you can go to our website to learn more about the classes that we offer. However, you know that if you have a question, you can always call, email, contact me, and I'm more than willing to answer your questions and help you design the most effective survey or focus group that we possibly can. So you see the website listed below. Make sure that you're reaching out if you have questions. Love to hear from you and love to hear about additional topics that you might like to talk about. So you can see the questions that we tried to answer today. If there's any last minute questions, I'm happy to take them. But don't forget to fill out the survey that we're offering so we know what to do better to answer the questions that you have. So please respond to that survey. And then we're always happy to take any questions that you might have and get into a discussion with you about how to most effectively answer the questions that you need to know from your customers. So if you need to talk, here's my information. And as always, the Alumni Association is very happy to get your questions and they'll forward them on. So you can't miss me. Feel free to ask any questions that you might have, and it's always a delight to talk to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Margie. And as she said, if you had any more questions that we didn't get to or ones that you think of afterward, please go ahead and you can email them to ritalum@rit.edu, and we'll direct your questions to Margie, or you can direct them to her at her contact information right up on your screen right now. Please consider joining us on Wednesday, October 23rd for our next webinar, Creating an Unforgettable Business Event. If you want to learn how to impress VIP clients, make board members happy, or just plan a successful event without losing your mind, alumna Tracy Armstrong, founder and president of Armstrong Connections, will share her nearly 30 years of experience running impressive events for 5 to 500 people. Also remember that Brick City Homecoming and Family Weekend is upcoming next week. So if you are in the Rochester area, we hope you'll take some time to visit rit.edu/brickcity and see all of the events that are going on. There's tremendous stuff for people to come and participate in, unbelievable speakers. So please take a look and sign up if you're going to be in the area. Thank you all again for joining us.